Everyone, I'm Tarun Douglas along with Nate Autry and Avi Dingery, and welcome to the second ever episode of the Triple Option Podcast. Today we'll be focusing on college football, specifically reviewing the Thursday and Friday games of this Thanksgiving week, previewing tomorrow's Saturday games, as well as looking at possible college football playoff scenarios. Please like and subscribe and follow for future content.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the only Thursday game that happened in college football, which was, of course, the Egg Bowl, which ended in a victory for Ole Miss over Mississippi State for the second consecutive year and resulted in Ole Miss achieving 10 regular season wins for the first time in school history.
School history, really? That seems unbelievable. I don't know if you'll notice this, but I feel like Matt Corral he didn't have that like superstar game a lot of fans were expecting to have, but he did what he needed to do to get the win, especially on the ground.
To be fair, the Egg Bowl is like one of those rivalries where no one's really going to come out as a statistical god, because it's very much like no one's gonna play a perfect game at rivalries like the Egg Bowl, so you can't really hold Corral to much standard for that.
And he didn't have a bad game overall. He was 26 for 34, 234 passing yards, one touchdown, one interception, along with 12 rushes for 45 yards and a touchdown. So it's a typical performance for him with passing numbers that aren't necessarily gaudy or insane like we saw last year. And then
And
it's a large number of carries, especially for a quarterback. So
it's a tough environment being in Starkville at the Egg Bowl, right? So
He did have one really dumb interception, but outside of that, he had a very good game. Other than that,
well, yeah, but even on that, it wasn't a great I'd throw an idea, but you and me were talking beforehand, Abby, that like if you put in some more heat on that ball, it probably would have been caught. So even then, like I'd say a fairly good game from Corral.
meanwhile for Will Rogers, 58 attempted passes, only 38 completed.
and three of those incompletions ended up being, I'd say, the biggest moment in the game. Right before halftime, Mississippi State has first and goal on the 5, and they proceed to drop three passes in a row and then miss a field goal attempt, which leads to almost going to half leading 10-6. And I think that was probably the biggest momentum swing in the whole game. Because
Plus
up until that point,
Mississippi
Mississippi State's defense
State
had been playing lights out. They'd been playing well. And their offense had been getting yards. They struggled to score in the red zone, but they were still moving up and down the field. But that sequence of events right there, I think it really crushed Mississippi State because it was ugly. There's no other way to put it. Three drop passes in a row, and then you miss the
I
field
mean,
goal. That's not a good look for the team.
that's one of the flaws of Leach's offense. It's very good at like the deep ball, but when it comes to like short passes and being somewhat more conservative, I this is the one difference between this is where I'll give Kiffin credit in opposition to Leach. Is I think Kiffin, like, while he does run a more like quote unquote air raid style offense, he's willing to go to the ground game. I don't think Leach has that same confidence.
Oh, I can disagree with you there, Tarun. Ole Miss actually led the SEC in rushing last year, and they currently lead the SEC in rushing this year. I'd say that they're actually more of a run-based concept. It's just that the way they do it is that the running opens up the passing lanes. But I do agree with you that Leach is very stout with his dedication to the air raid, and he won't change, which was a little surprising given that going to this game, Ole Miss was one of the worst defenses in the SEC against the run.
Yeah, their leading rusher, Jaquavius Marks, only got 8 carries for 45 yards. So
True testament.
also like Rogers only threw for one touchdown. So like it's a lot of volume for not much like technical production.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, moving on to Friday, where there was several games. The most nationally relevant of which was probably Cincinnati, who defeated East Carolina 35-13.
Another
I
dominant
just
game for them on the ground, of course. Jerome Ford, 20 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown. As well as
yeah,
Montgomery.
I wouldn't say dominant. Solid game. They just let the talent speak for itself. I just patted East Carolina on the head.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, it wasn't like an amazing game from Cincinnati. Desmond Ritter, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Did have 300 passing yards though, and the box score seems like I mean, the box score like hints at dominant, like indicates dominance. I think Cincinnati has to avoid these like Cincinnati has to be as technically sound as possible because while they are four, they know that the committee isn't going to do them any favors.
I
So
would say that this Cincinnati performance was a lot like how they've been playing in the past couple of weeks, where it wasn't pretty at times, but they've gotten the wins, and so they end the season 12-0. I'd say that they've done the most that any group of five team could possibly do to make the playoff. So now we'll just see what happens going forwards. It's up to the college football playoff committee.
yeah, because I believe they play Houston in the conference championship, regardless. And Houston's a top 20 team in their own regard, according to the AP at least. I don't think they're in it for the like, playoff.
Oh,
potentially.
likely not.
Yeah. Okay, I'm moving on to some other national relevant games. This game more relevant to the ACC. The University of North Carolina Tar Heels continued the rivalry with the North Carolina State Wolfpack, with NC State pulling out with a late victory, 34-30. They came back 14 points in the fourth quarter, secure secure the dub. A game that really like signifies Mac Brown's UNC team this year. It hasn't necessarily been a bad team, just a bunch of really disappointing losses that aren't blowouts. Blowouts. They barely lost in Pittsburgh. They were fairly competitive with Notre Dame. They barely lost to Florida State, and they barely lost to Virginia Tech at the beginning of the year.
I would say this is a kind of a crushing loss for North Carolina to lose against a rival like NC State in the way that they did, with a touchdown, an onside kick recovery, and then a touchdown again, all within the last 2 minutes of the game. That's just brutal, and it's gonna be hard for Mac Brown's program to overcome that going forwards. But again,
Yeah,
it's just another disappointing performance. Well, not necessarily disappointing, but just underwhelming considering the hype that
yeah,
Sam Howell was getting before the season. He goes 14 for 26, 147, one touchdown, one interception. And
yeah.
that's just not the
And well,
type of stat lines that you were projecting with him getting all the first round draft hype going into the
yeah,
season. So,
and like while he was struggling, Devin Leary actually surpassed Philip Rivers as the leading quarterback in NC State in terms of touchdown passes, as he threw 4 touchdowns
no, I see
tonight.
that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's been quite a mediocre year for a lot of the quarterbacks were projected to go super high, such as Sam Howell, Matt Corral, and
yeah,
especially Spencer Rattler, though. Like, that man has
yeah.
fallen off the
I'd say
planet.
Rattler had a less than mediocre year. He's lost his own story.
He's done. He went from
He's
arguably like
unemployed.
he went from like a top 10 selection to like the fourth round right now.
Yeah,
He's
he's probably not
done.
even getting drafted this year. He's probably going to
Also,
come back
like
again.
looking back at NC State, I think in the current like culture of coaching, where it's like 3 years and you're done, NC State's like quite the contrary. Because NC State's coach has been there since 2013. Like that's 9 years for David Dorn, and well, they haven't like obviously been like a national championship level team. Like I think you'll take 9 and 3 seasons like this.
Mhm. I would agree. He's made them competitive in the ACC Atlantic, which, as we
Yeah,
know, has Clemson. And so, I mean, this year, they're tied with Clemson with conference record. They're nationally ranked. They just came off a season where they go 9-3. I mean, they're a good team. He's built a good, solid
yeah.
program there.
Clemson's in a weird position where like they're second in the ACC Atlantic, while North Carolina State is third, but Clemson can't make it in the conference championship while NC State can simply because of just weird head to heads.
Well, if Clemson wins one more game, they'll be 7-2 in conference play, so they actually wouldn't make it. As long
Yeah,
if
because
Wake Forest loses, if
NC
Wake
State would
Forest
have the head
loses,
to head.
if Wake Forest loses, that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah,
But
Coming
that's a
and we'll
whole
get to
situation
that
that we'll talk
later.
about later.
Real
Yeah, and
quick,
then
Mhm.
coming back to
go
Devin
ahead.
Leary. Coming back to Devin Leary real quick. He's had quite an underrated season this year with 31 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions the entire year,
Oh,
and he's still a sophomore. Do you think there's a future for this NC State team next year, like progressing up the
I mean,
rankings?
considering he just beat a Philip Rivers record as a sophomore, I would hope so. They might be dangerous going forwards.
Yeah, it
It'll be one
depends.
to
Depends
see.
how Clemson bounces back next year if they do so. Okay,
Yeah, they be looking.
moving on to some Big Ten action tonight. Tonight, Nebraska, another heartbreaker. This time at home. this Nebraska team is very confusing. Like, I don't want to make this analogy to Texas A&M, but they've been the Texas of the Big Ten, where they've been competitive in a lot of games. They can't hold it on to it at the end. Like they almost. Like, let's look at their schedule real quick. They lost to Michigan State in overtime. They they lost to Michigan by 3 points. They lost to Purdue by 5. They lost to Ohio State by 9. They lost to Wisconsin by 7, and again today by 7.
So almost all their games have been 1 or 2 score losses.
And they almost beat Oklahoma.
And they almost beat Oklahoma. So it's tough,
And
you know.
that's why I'm glad they didn't fire Scott Frost. They just like did what the Michigan did with Jim Harbaugh and just restructured his contract. Because like you need to keep because obviously something's working in Nebraska if you're staying close in these games. Like Nebraska should not be close in the Michigan and Ohio State games given their talent level. If you look at most of these games, most of the errors, most of the reasons they're losing is like late game mistakes by Adrian Martinez.
And the Oklahoma performance by Nebraska is underrated. You know, they were projected to lose by double-digit points in that game, even though it was a rivalry, and they hung around for a long time.
Yeah. Wait, Abby, do you know if that's like a deal between the two schools where Oklahoma goes to Lincoln next year, or not in Lincoln?
I'm not sure.
Norman?
I'm really not sure. However, speaking of dangerous rivalries, let's talk about the week that's about to approach us.
Oh yeah, it's
The
already gonna
game.
be.
Rivalry week.
It's bad.
Big rivalry week.
Um, so yeah, we're gonna go ahead and pick these games. Well, we've done that beforehand, I should say, and then we'll discuss why and who we picked.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Alright, so starting off with Florida State, it seems like we unanimously all picked Florida State. It's been a mediocre year for both of these teams. Florida, especially, coming in with high expectations, and that's why I picked Florida State to win because they really failed.
I think
Um,
Florida State's, they're struggling. Their program has not been in a good place for a while, and Mike Norvell's done a good job keeping them competitive in several games. I mean, you look at the game against Notre Dame at start the season, they were right there. And even though this game is in Gainesville, I just feel like Florida is not in a good place with Dan Mullen,
yeah,
and
not having a head coach
their
and all.
fan base is just apathetic right now. It's not good.
Yeah,
It's a tough
there's the
spot.
things momentum can do. This is the same Florida team we were all hyping up when they effectively lost by an extra point to Alabama. Like,
hmm Yeah, it's not been a good
and
season.
let's get to some of
Uh,
these other
Moving on,
predictions.
Texas Tech versus Baylor, a game which Baylor must win to stay Big 12 championship or title game, I should say, relevant. I think we all picked Baylor.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of Tech is not very good. I say that as someone who had to try to watch Tech games this year. It's kind of hard to watch. They're just
yeah,
bad.
Yeah,
and
and I agree.
then
I think Dave Aranda has Baylor trending in the right direction. Like this game means too much for them to lose.
yeah,
Next up, we have Wake Forest versus Boston College, and I'm surprised to see you guys both pick Boston College. I think Wake Forest has been performing well this year. They've had a solid season. They're tied for the first in their division of the ACC.
yeah.
So, can you guys explain to me why you chose Boston College?
The reason I chose Boston College was like looking blindly at the stats, and when a lot of people pick Wake Forest, I just think Wake Forest as of late hasn't looked like the same team. I feel like they've lost a lot of momentum losing to Clemson, just in the fashion that they did last week. I think that kind of carries over into this week, and I think College pulls one out.
I mean, I just look at their offensive stats, and it's just abysmal. Their starting quarterback has 6 touchdowns on the year, and they have 2 quarterbacks with 6 touchdowns on the year. There's just
Yeah, this is just one of
they
those
can't get
games where
anything
the
going.
stats make no sense. Like
Hmm.
this is like Texas versus Kansas. Like
I don't know. We'll see.
stats are thrown out the window.
I guess Boston College does have the home field advantage. We'll see. The next game, what might possibly be the most underrated team in the nation, UTSA versus North Texas. I think there's no doubt we all chose UTSA. They're
Best
probably not
team
going to
in the
make the college
state right
football
there.
playoff, but no, expect them to go undefeated.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's talk about Bedlam.
Interesting.
you
That's gonna
skip
be
one there, Kareem.
interesting. So,
You skip one there.
Yeah,
Okay, Oregon State,
we
Oregon.
kind of just
Let's
like
move
ignored
on.
Oregon and Georgia, but like those are like
Okay,
pretty
Georgia's
easy
had
games
too
to
much
win.
success. Georgia's had too much success. You know they're going to beat Georgia Tech, and Oregon has lost all my respect. Leave
Honestly,
them alone.
for the Georgia Tech game, the only thing you should be like looking towards is whether Georgia scores like more than 50 or not. Like that's just it's gonna be a pretty like abusive game for them.
Yeah,
Even though it's a good traditional rivalry, I can't see. Georgia's been so dominant against far better teams.
yeah,
Georgia all the way. Let's really quick pick the Civil War, as it used to be called, or is it now the Oregon State rivalry?
yeah.
We all picked
Based off
Oregon.
yeah, we all picked Oregon.
Disappointing loss near the end of the season, but they still have talent.
Yeah.
Mm.
Let's
Now
go to
let's get the
probably
Bedlam.
let's go. Yes, Bedlam, probably the number two biggest game this week. Obviously, Oklahoma State has already clinched their spot in the Big 12 championship game, which means that Oklahoma must win this game in order to make it. The game is
Yeah.
at Oklahoma State, and it'll be it'll be crazy. I mean, there's no way to really predict this one, but
Yeah.
explain to me why you guys chose Oklahoma.
So the way I view this game, it's going to be low scoring. I think weird for a Big 12 game, right? But I think it'll be a very low scoring game. I won't be surprised if one of the teams stays in the teens in terms of points scored. I just think if it becomes a dogfight, talent wins out, and Oklahoma just has the upper hand in that situation.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of go with the same thing. Even though the Cowboys are coming off of a 4 game win streak and they're really hot right now, I do feel like it's going to become a nitty gritty game and it's just going to come down to that dogfight. And once it comes down to that dogfight, it just depends on who has the most talent.
If
Unfortunately, that is Oklahoma.
I'm gonna
if
go against you guys. I
Oklahoma's
say that Oklahoma State's defense is going to be the difference in this game. Obviously, they're the number two scoring defense in this nation going this week, and we've seen this year that Oklahoma, when they get into games where they play against defenses, their own defenses had to stand up, and I'm not sure if I have that confidence in them. In games against Oklahoma and Nebraska, they've barely struggled to score 23 and 16 points, and I just feel like Oklahoma State will be fired up. They'll be at home, and I think they'll be able to overcome that and win this game.
think about Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma, especially as of late, always has one game that just sets off the firecracker for the rest of the season. And a lot of us thought that'd be Texas this year. Obviously, that turned out not to be the case.
I mean, in a way, it did.
In a way, yeah,
But
in a way, but like
I mean,
not.
I would
yeah,
disagree. I would say
but
it did
like
kind of. That's when they figured out Caleb Williams was the man.
yeah, but then
That's when
still like Caleb Williams is a true freshman. He had to kind of
the nation figured out that Spencer Rattler was a fraud. But that's about it.
yeah, and then I just think if Oklahoma can gain even a modicum of success on run defense, they will beat Oklahoma State because if you're forcing Spencer Sanders to lead his team through the air, like Tylen Wallace ain't there no more. Like I just can't see it.
This is the most important game in the state of Oklahoma. This like in
But yeah,
Oklahoma
it's
football.
versus the two relevant schools in the state of
And like
Oklahoma.
the thing is that most likely one of these teams will be the Big 12 champ. So like this
Yeah,
game will go a
interestingly,
long
I was
way.
actually if
So if
Oklahoma
Ok-
wins,
so
they play each other again.
Yep, and if Oklahoma State wins and Baylor wins, Baylor will obviously make it into the playoffs. But either way, it's a big game, and I'd say that the winner of this game basically guarantees, not guarantees, but the winner of this game eliminates the other from college football playoff contention. So
But if Oklahoma wins and then Oklahoma State wins the Big 12 just shoots itself in the foot.
Yeah.
So
You for a chance of any Big 12 team making, you'd have to win 2 games in a row. And
yeah,
honestly,
one of the
that's
Oklahoma teams has to at least.
one of the Oakland. Yeah. Moving
so
on
the
to a
next
game.
ooh,
Sorry.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
cut you off there, Robbie. So the next game we have is the Iron Bowl at Auburn. Okay, well
Yeah,
Honestly,
I'm gonna attack Tarun here a little bit. Take us through why you think Auburn will beat Alabama.
I think it's just time Auburn pulls a win that makes no sense. Like statistically on paper, my pick is doomed to fail. The reason that I have is Alabama has been a far more inconsistent team this year than people have been giving them credit for. the game's at Jordan Hare, which can be a tough place to play, especially if you're Bama on the road.
Hmm.
And to be fair, a lot of it's just a gut feeling. I do not have confidence in this Bama team.
I will say that if Alabama has one weakness, especially this year, it has been away environments. You've seen it at the Swamp. I mean, they lost at College Station because of the environment there, so I could see that happening. But I just feel like Auburn is not the team this year. They lost Bo Nix, who has been ungodly at home, and so it hurts having to start TJ Finley.
But also,
And
like
I just think that
Alabama's run
Alabama,
defense hasn't been great, and like Auburn has some good running backs, and Tank Bigsby and Jaquez Hunter.
I just think their overall offensive firepower is not close to Alabama. I think Bryce Young will be able to have another outstanding statistical game, and Alabama win this game. Any
Although I
thoughts,
do
Albie?
think, although I do think Alabama is somewhat fraudulent, I do think that the offensive talent does win out at the end of the day, despite like you were talking about the environment really playing on this team. It just comes down to the talent. If Nix was playing, I would go for Auburn low key just because of how we've seen teams that are not supposed to be on the level of Alabama essentially like get in the heads and win games. But I just don't think Auburn has the assets to do it right now. Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have the Land Grant Bowl. Penn State versus Michigan State. Either team is likely eliminated from the college football playoff, but it's still a very exciting college football game going forwards.
I think they'll all pick Michigan State off of pure momentum. Like I think Penn State has lost a lot of the winning sales.
Yeah,
I
that's
agree.
kind
I
of
think Michigan State got embarrassed last week against Ohio State, but overall they've had a good season.
And they'll be out for blood.
hmm I just look for Kenneth Walker to bounce back in this
Yeah,
game
because
and have
Melton got a bunch
another
of
great
dogs
game.
out of the transfer portal. They aren't the most talented, but like they will fight. And this is the game
hmm
where they kind of show that fight.
Yep. Albie, you have anything else you want to say?
no, that's literally about it. It's just yeah, Michigan State's coming off a game that they need some form of motivation to come off of. Well, Penn State's kind of given up. They're like done for the season.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Next up, we have Notre Dame versus Stanford. Notre Dame's very much so in it for the college football playoffs.
Uh,
Any thought? I think we all picked Notre Dame.
Yeah.
uh,
The only reason why
we just,
this has an
we
impact is just
just
because
ban Notre Dame from college football. Like they don't play nobody, or
Hmm.
at least like banish them to a conference.
the only team that they played that was good this year was Cincinnati, and they lost. Like
I
this,
mean,
they're
I would
Yeah.
say Wisconsin was good at the time they played them, but other than that, no,
No,
they
not the time
haven't
they
played any
played them.
teams.
They're good now, but Wisconsin was had horrible momentum. They were playing Notre Dame.
I mean, yeah, they played a lot of really close losses. It
Yeah.
was tough.
Okay.
I don't know. Notre Dame always seems to sneak their way into the playoff, even though they don't have the reputation or the strength of
Yeah.
schedule. We'll see this year. Like
Let's get
this year,
to
if they get in over a team like Cincinnati, there would be a lot of questions asked.
let's get into
The game,
uh,
the game.
at
the
the big
game,
house.
the battle for the Rust Belt, the battle for the Big Ten. I don't know.
John
Okay.
Harbaugh's
Ohio
worst
State versus
nightmare.
Michigan. Um, Common sense would say pick Ohio State. We say fuck common sense in this podcast. Me and Nate are going with Michigan. Avi, why are you going Ohio State?
Honestly, coming off of the momentum against Michigan State, where CJ Stroud just dominated, and because the current head coach of Michigan is John Harbaugh, and sorry, but like Ohio State does own John Harbaugh. He just like becomes a shell of his former self and just is not he just does not show up. And even though Ohio State does have a very good chance of losing this game, I feel like it's a close game. It might be like even a 3 or 2 point game at the end, but I still do think Ohio State comes out with this one.
All I have to say is, if not now, when? I mean, they don't play last year. They're at Michigan State. John Harbaugh, I mean, obviously he's 0-5 against Ohio State. Been the biggest struggle of his career. And the stakes are, they're as big as they've always been. Got two top 5 teams nationally coming to Michigan, coming to Ann Arbor. in the big house.
at the big
I
house.
can't help but feel like this has to be the time that John Harbaugh gets it done. It has to be the time he gets it done. If it doesn't happen now, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, and I don't know if he's even going to be able to stay coaching there. But this has to be the
Yeah,
one.
I do want
I
to say,
take it from.
sorry.
I'll wrap it real quick. I'll just say from Michigan to Ohio State. The reason I'm picking Michigan is one reason. The pressure they've been able to force from defense. Michigan's offense isn't great, but Ohio State's defense isn't like. Obviously, they played amazing against Michigan State, but overall during the season they haven't been anything to write home about. Um, I think Michigan's. I think Michigan has the only team with enough defensive pressure to get to C.J. Stroud in the Big Ten. Who's seen with C.J. Stroud? He's very talented, but once you get in his head, he's a lot like Bryce Young. It just his emotions almost take over the game.
Hmm. And if there's one place
So
you're going to get in the quarterback's head, it's the big house. And this is the biggest game in the big house. I mean, you got over 100,000 people screaming at you. It's going to be an insane environment. Probably bigger than Penn State whiteout game, honestly. This might be the best environment we see all year.
I
and
do
also
want
like
to, sorry.
yeah, and I'll just say real quick. For and a lot of people say like, oh, Ohio State will go to Penn State and win, but you also have to realize like Penn State as a fan base, a lot of other fans are like this is our year, but then when they already had like I think two losses by the time they went playing Ohio State, the stakes weren't the same. And I would and like as intimidating as Penn State is at night, Michigan at Michigan in the day is like the most intimidating daytime environment you can think of because it's cold, it's cold, it's rowdy, and there's a reason they call it the Big House. Like that place is loud.
I mean, it's a third biggest stadium in the world. It's massive. What are you going to say, Albie?
I do want to say that currently, even with CJ Stroud being in the Heisman race, I think this is probably the biggest game of the year for him right now. Just because
Hmm.
if he goes into the big house with, like you said, 100,000 screaming, raging fans of Michigan just yelling at him, and he comes out of there with a win and most likely like securing a spot in the college football playoffs, I think it'd be very hard to not give him the Heisman, even though he is a freshman and there's always some like things against that. I do feel like this game would be the biggest game of his campaign.
Yeah, this is his chance for him as is, as they all say, Heisman moment.
It would be
So we'll
very
see.
ironic to have his Heisman moment against Michigan, who, if y'all didn't know, has one of the most iconic Heisman players ever, Desmond Howard.
Hmm. Yep,
Yeah.
his Heisman pose.
Also, like Michigan's O line is a lot better than Michigan State's, and so I feel like Hassan Hoskins and Blake Corum can get a lot more space to run with. The thing about Ohio State, once you get past their D line, their linebackers in secondary. The problem with the linebackers in secondary is like not that they're bad as individuals, just like when you have such when you have a lot of change at the defense coordinator position over a year and who's calling plays, and cause a lot of like disjointedness as a unit.
Mm,
I think that could play out to Michigan's favor.
Hmm. So I think we're gonna move forward now and
yes,
discuss
honestly,
college football playoff scenarios for
Yeah,
several of the top 25 teams we think have the best chances, outside chances, and then downright ridiculous chances.
yeah, and then like let's set some things out of the way. Georgia, don't screw up, you're in.
Yeah,
Cincy, don't screw up,
I
you're
think even
in.
if Georgia loses against Alabama, they make it.
Yeah,
As long
yeah,
as
it's
they beat Georgia
hard.
Tech, obviously. If they lose against Georgia
Bama
Tech
win
and
out.
against Alabama, then
Yeah, Bama has to win out to get in. Same with Ohio State.
mhm.
Michigan also
Cincinnati.
win out. It gets interesting from Notre Dame down actually. So let's
Yeah,
take Notre
Notre
Dame for
Dame.
example.
I think Notre Dame is reliant on what happens to everyone else. It would take very uninspiring losses from Cincinnati, Michigan, and then Alabama or Ohio State. I think for
No,
them to make it in.
what they need to happen is basically either they basically need they need Michigan to beat Ohio State because that clear spot at the top, pushing them closer, While if Michigan loses, they'd still be out of the top four.
And then
But
they would need Michigan to lose in the Big Ten championship
yeah,
game.
they need Michigan to lose to Whiskey. I think it's Whiskey.
Wisconsin whiskey is a drink, in case you weren't aware.
Yeah.
My bad. So yeah, that's Notre Dame situation. Oklahoma State, I'd say if they beat Oklahoma
Win
and
out.
then win the Big 12 championship against either Baylor or Oklahoma, they're in. Same for Baylor. If Baylor actually requires a little bit of luck, they need Oklahoma
Because
State to beat
no, even
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma State, if they win out, so either Michigan or Ohio State loses, that clears up a spot.
I'd see
Let's say
what
Bama
I'm thinking
beats
is,
Georgia. Let's say
would you
Bama
take
beats Georgia. That leaves one spot left for Notre Dame versus Oklahoma State. Who do you think the committee picks?
see, this is where it
12.
gets controversial. Would you pick a one-loss Oklahoma State or an undefeated Cincinnati? It would have to be
As
Oklahoma
in the
State,
views of
wouldn't
the
it?
committee or the views of the
Like, who would you pick?
like I would pick Cincinnati, but like I think we had to think who the playoff committee is going to pick.
I would pick Oklahoma State, honestly. The Big 12 championship is a lot harder to go.
Honestly,
They would get 12 wins at that point.
But
I
then
would like
like
to. I would
Cincinnati
like to
still
see
has
the.
the better win at that point with Notre Dame.
Avi, what do you say?
I do want to say I think whoever outside of Baylor, whoever wins the Big 12 probably gets a spot in the playoffs because I do think, like I said, Alabama is fraudulent this year. If they lose to Auburn, they're done. I don't see them making the playoffs. Even if they do beat Auburn, they're gonna get their butts handed to them by Georgia. I think
I think if
that
they beat Georgia, even if they lost to Auburn, they'd still make it just because they'd probably
it's
take four with
it's
that.
Bama.
That damn SEC bias.
It's
Actually,
Bama, but like yeah, at this point. However, if it ends up where Bama is a 3-loss team, they're gone. Like I think we can all agree that there's
If
no
they have like a
SEC
Florida-esque
bias.
finish to this, if they have like a 2020 Florida-esque finish to the season, then obviously, say they do beat Auburn and they do beat Georgia, that leaves one spot because you know Georgia has to be in, you know Bama has to be in, you know the winner of the Big Ten has to be in if it's Ohio State or Michigan.
just because those teams have had such similar, well,
And
good seasons.
let's
Unless they
say,
lose the Big Ten championship.
yeah, and let's say Cincy finishes 13-0. Let's say Notre Dame finishes 11-1. Let's say Oklahoma State finishes 12-1. Who do you put in the fourth spot?
You, ideally, you put in Cincy just because
I don't know if
they've been
Cincy's
doing
even a
good this
lock
year.
to
Who do
make
you
it.
think the playoff committee is going to put
Even
in
if
the spot?
Cincy
The com-
goes
the commit.
even if
I,
Cincy goes 13-0, I wouldn't have them as a lock. I don't think the committee will have them as a lock. I think they're still probably fighting for the fourth place spot.
I think
I don't think.
the committee probably just goes SEC championship, Big Ten, Bama, and then whoever wins the Big 12. So most
Mhm.
likely Cincy gets out unless like Baylor comes and wins the entire thing. That's the
And that
only
also
way.
comes down to because let's say it comes down to Cincy and Oklahoma State. It
I would
also
pick.
comes down to
It depends.
quality
If
of
Oklahoma State goes
competition.
undefeated in the last two games, I would take Oklahoma State over Cincy. I think the committee would
Yeah,
too.
but like think about it. So Cincinnati, they're likely going to play an 11-1 Houston team, which would probably be like let's see if Houston's in the
So let's look at it this way:
Houston's
Who has
24
Cincinnati
in the
beat this year?
CFP.
Who has Cincinnati beat this year? If they were 13-0, they would have beaten a Houston team
Notre Dame
who's solid, and
and Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, who we all agree is pretty fraudulent. Whereas you look at
That's
Oklahoma State, they've fought
But
through
you have
the
to look at it through
entire
the
Big
eyes of the
12.
college football playoff, right? You had to go based off of their rankings.
mm,
So based on that, they'd have a number 6 win and a number 24 win, which will likely change after they
mm.
beat the crap out of UConn.
If you look at Oklahoma State, if they win, they would have an 8, a 10, and those would be their two big wins. And they played in a Power Five conference. And so
Hmm.
I don't see them
What
not making it.
what if it's Oklahoma though? Not Oklahoma State. Is there still that same
I
chance that they
honestly
make it
don't
in?
know. I think Oklahoma has just been
Here's the
too
thing: if Oklahoma
unimpressive in all
State,
their wins.
if it's Oklahoma State versus Cincy, I see the playoff committee putting Oklahoma State. But if it's Oklahoma versus Cincy, I think they put in Cincy because
Yeah, I
this
agree with
clearly
that.
do not like Oklahoma.
hmm What's
Do you agree
interesting
with
is that
that?
we're talking about Oklahoma, but they're in 10th right now, according to the college football playoff, and Baylor's in 8th. What if Baylor wins out?
I don't
They
think
make the big
they're
and they
not
make
gonna
the
make
Big
it.
12 championship.
They're not gonna
They
make
Well,
it.
and they make
let's talk
and they
I
about
make the Big
Baylor real
12
quick.
championship.
So Baylor, they'd have to win out, obviously. So they'd be 12-2. No, 11-2 rather. 11-2. You need. Let's see.
They have wins against Iowa State, BYU, and Oklahoma,
Yeah,
But do
with
you
2 away
assuming they
losses
beat, assuming they
by
beat either
less than.
Oklahoma State, assuming they beat Oklahoma State. Like, let's say Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, and then Baylor beats Texas Tech, and Baylor then beats Oklahoma State. You just
That would be
need
very interesting. I don't
Baylor.
know.
Then Baylor would have a win against the number 10 team. Then would have beaten the number 17 that beat that number 10 team,
And the number 13 team, BYU.
and the number 13 team.
I think you would have to put that in over Cincy also.
I don't know if the committee allows a
But
2-loss team to get in
but
though.
then what they would need
You
is
just look at Alabama
they would
last
need
year.
Georgia to beat Alabama, right? But no,
It
wait.
all depends. I think they would need.
I think Baylor needs Auburn to beat Alabama too. Because say if this last spot comes down to a 2-loss Bama versus a 2-loss Baylor, who do you think they're going to put in?
I would put in Baylor, but it's
Well, who do
probably
you
gonna
think
be
the playoff
Alabama.
committee is going to put in? That's
I
what
Bama.
think
I'm
it'll be.
saying. So you need Bama to be a 3-loss team.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about something very deep and personal to me. Ole Miss making the college football playoff. No, I'm just kidding. It's not gonna happen. We're like A&M in 2019. We lost the game
No,
that mattered the most, which was
no,
against Alabama.
let's talk about this. Okay. What would need to happen?
We would need Alabama
Baylor
to
needs to
lose against
lose to
Auburn.
Texas Tech. Oklahoma State has to lose to Oklahoma twice. No, wait, but that would no. You
That
need
would put
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma in.
Yeah, you need Oklahoma to beat Oklahoma State, then Oklahoma
And
State to
then
beat
we would need
Oklahoma.
almost would need the Big 12 championship to be like the ugliest game of football ever. Like maybe like a
You
3-6
basically need
good
the
old
best Big
classic.
12 team to be 12-2, 11-2,
Hmm. You would need Alabama to lose the Iron Bowl and then
and
win.
lose to Georgia.
And
Take
actually no, I
down
guess lose to
Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah.
They probably need to take down Georgia because that casts
No,
uncertainty in the
no.
SEC.
If they lose to Georgia, that would freeze
Oh, I
up
guess okay, I
two
get what you're
spots.
saying. Yeah, if they lost to Georgia, they would be below Ole
And then
Miss
you need the
theoretically.
Big Ten. You need the winner of the East to lose to the winner of the West,
So you need like Ohio State to beat Michigan. Actually, no, Michigan's probably the more uncertain team. You need Michigan to beat Ohio State and then
and
lose
then
to
Michigan to lose to
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Then you need Notre Dame to like commit die against Stanford.
yep. And then Cincinnati would be 3. Georgia would be 1.
And you need Cincinnati to
It would be
lose.
Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati, Ole Miss.
And you need Cincinnati to lose.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a
Oh
chance
yeah.
that Michigan makes it in?
I'd
What would
say
that
yes.
look like?
If I'd say winner Big Ten gets in.
Oh
If it's
yeah,
not Wisconsin,
that's true. Oh no, this is.
Now, if we think Ole Miss and Baylor could have a shot, do you think there's a way Oregon could get in?
no, nope. Pac-12's done.
I think too much has to get go their way for them to even have a shot. It's just
Yeah.
that
Nope.
loss to Utah killed them. They
And to
completely.
sell down the one
I think if the
pay-per-view
Ohio
television
State
station,
win had
do
okay,
you think
think about it this
A&M
way.
could get in?
If the Ohio State win
No.
had happened last week, they would make it in. That's how messed up it is. The Ohio State win was really impressive, but it was just so long ago. It's not fresh on the committee's minds.
This Oregon team has no consistency. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause I think if they don't lose Verdell to injury, I think they all like here's so Stanford. They didn't bring their offensive coordinator with them. Cristobal doesn't call plays. I think they win the game. Their offensive coordinator is there. That's one loss. And then if CJ Verdell's like healthy, I think they at least are competitive against Utah. So you're 11-1, but you're still respected.
Yeah. I just don't think the Pac-12 is going to. It's basically guaranteed they're not getting one right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that probably concludes most of the likely and then improbable ones. Obviously, there are infinite possibilities. If all the teams in top 10 lose in spectacular fashion, maybe some teams like Michigan State, BYU, Wisconsin could theoretically slip into the 4th spot, but I don't see it happening.
Hmm.
UTSA is not getting in even though they're undefeated. Too much prejudice there. But that probably wraps it up for this episode.
Do any of y'all have like
Yeah.
a final prediction of what the four would look like in your eyes at the moment?
I think
Yeah.
the four is Georgia, Michigan, Cincy, and Oklahoma.
I'll go ahead and say Georgia, Michigan, and I'll kind of mix it up. Let's say Oklahoma State and Alabama.
Hmm. I was probably
You
gonna
think the
go.
committee just pulls one for Bama?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think honestly the committee might just go off the big names. So I'm gonna go with Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, and then Oklahoma. However, I do think Cincy should probably make it in though. It just the
Mhm.
committee is the committee.
Yeah. Okay. We'll
Okay.
see. We'll see you again
Want to call
tomorrow
tonight?
for our NFL predictions
Okay.
and preview for week 13. Is it 13?
Once again,
Week 12
once
NFL.
again,
So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Once again, remember to subscribe to the Triple Option podcast on YouTube, as well as add to your playlist on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you can, and come listen to us tomorrow night as we discuss confusing as hell NFL season. Yeah. Good night, everybody, and enjoy y'all's night.
have a great weekend.